All right, so last month, Todd Scott, our Human Resources Director, presented to you on kind of the history of our compensation plan and gave you a 7-minute or less version of that. And so I can't do that again this month because now we're going to talk about what's coming. So he's the brief presenter who can get down to brass tacks. I'm the one who bloviates. So here we go. This presentation has been given, or a version of it has been given to a number of focus groups, and I'll talk about that in a bit. We're really in data gathering mode and continuing to do that with you as the committee members, trying to help formulate what the next compensation plan is going to look like. So the objectives of what we're going to do today are laid out there. Including strategic priority, identifying what that was when you approved that a couple years ago already, talking about what the conceptual model is going to look like, and then what the next steps are. And as you have feedback, please provide that throughout the process. So this is the strategic priority that you approved back in April of 2017. I highlighted a couple of areas specifically that I thought were worthwhile touching on for why we're here, especially when I present this to staff members. So the result maps per se didn't necessarily highlight compensation plan study redesign, but it was a message that we heard loud and clear as part of the strategic planning process back in 2015, focusing on internal workforce development. So the goal specifically in that bottom bullet was approved back in April of 17, that we present to you a proposed compensation model. Initially the goal was January of 2018. Executive committee amended that probably about 6 months ago, given a number of the things that were going on, and they said to push it back to July, which is why we're here in June. So what this is going to do, and what you'll see in the next few minutes, is we will present a strategy to you that talks about the timeline, what the plan itself is going to look like, and we'll talk a little bit about how we might sufficiently fund the proposed model going forward. And we have a couple of different strategies to talk about that. So just to put a little context behind what we're trying to accomplish, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between what staff's expectations are of a compensation plan and what I feel, based on our one-on-one discussions with all county board supervisors, what the elected officials are expecting from a compensation plan. And so I've shown this slide, this graph on the left to staff many, many times. Basically what this shows is that as you probably know in your own jobs, over time you do a lot of continuing education and getting better at your craft, whether it's in human resources or law enforcement, it doesn't matter. You're constantly learning and improving. On the elected side, you guys are part-time. There isn't a lot of that other than maybe a WCA conference or something like that. And so we've got this gap that we're trying to manage, and this discussion is doing exactly that. And so what I heard when I talked to many of you, not just this last spring, but over the course of the last 4 or 5 years now, is that we want to see a pay-for-performance type of a model, something much more private sector than what I would call the pay-for-pulse model that we have today here at the county. And I got to credit one of the consultants that we used with that phrase. That's not my own, so I won't steal it. It's trademark. Staff, on the other hand, I think there is some comfortability with the existing plan. Of course, we've used it for many, many decades. It's very reliable, it's very consistent. As long as you continue to work here, stay in good standing, hence the pay for pulse commentary, you're pretty much going to stay in the step and lane system and work through it. So our compensation plan team was trying to figure out how do we thread the needle between those two very, very different concepts, and that's what we've been working on for the last few months. Our strategy team is made up of myself, Matt Furno, Deputy County Administrator, and Todd Scott, our Human Resources Director. From the perspective of the Ivory Tower, we are the 3 guys in the Ivory Tower trying to come up with a plan that's acceptable to everybody, and we're working through that now. So we started with pay for performance concepts because that's what I heard from the board is what we wanted to do. We looked at a variety of them. We came up with, had some heated discussions, had all kinds of different models and different tweaks to models that we thought might work. The nice thing about having Matt and Todd both on the team is they both have private sector experience, so bringing that into the discussion was very, very helpful. We then had quite a bit of a reality check when we brought in and started looking at what other counties are doing. And I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we found was we were beyond leading edge, we were probably thinking bleeding edge of county government. And so when you look at Waukesha, Jefferson, and Dodge, all of whom are relatively close to us and either are in the middle of a plan or are close enough that it's worth checking them out, we were true pay for performance. Strict pay for performance doesn't really exist in the public sector, at least close to us. And so we started to work towards contacting the existing consultants that the surrounding counties are using. So Waukesha County, and some of you may be familiar with Siegel Waters Consulting, great big firm. I think their closest offices are Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. So they're much more than just public sector, although they have a public sector component. They are working with Waukesha County and have been for some time now. Austin Peters Group, memory serves, Kansas City. Also modestly big firm. They are primarily public focused, or at least the person we talked to is primarily public focused. They are working with Jefferson County in real time. They're redoing their compensation plan. I note here that we are not talking to Carlson Detman. For those of you who are familiar with Carlson, aren't familiar with Carlson Detman, they are the firm that we used most recently and have a history of using, judging by Supervisor Sorsey's face, and several of the faces of employees I've seen over the last 5 years. Nobody wants to see Charlie Carlson back in the building, or his firm back in the building. It just didn't end really very well.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but
please do.
Spent $70,000 and then didn't do nothing. Okay, didn't make any sense. Red line, whatever. It wasn't right. So I'm sorry, I'm done.
So just to ask a stupid question: do we have to use a compensation vendor in order to do this process?
We don't have to. We started off by talking about not doing that. The farther and deeper we get into it, the more comfortable I am bringing a consultant in to support. And in large, well, two reasons primarily. One, we're trying to do something still pretty different, I would say, than most other counties are doing. And I think the expertise of someone who can help guide that along is helpful. And two, what we're starting to find is we're not able to even simply tweak what we've done in the past. This is, what you're gonna see is enough of a shift away from the way we've always done it, that I think it will take some credibility of someone who's done it before for the board to fully trust it, for the staff to fully trust it. And that's what you're going to see is that's what we're working with right now. We've got to trust
to go on this question, when you look at what a county does, what the county government does, we're 24/7, 365. We have components that don't fit a normal private sector model. And when you look at our FTE count, full-time equivalent for those on camera, you're looking at what, 850?
Probably
approximately
6 1/4 full-time.
Okay, full-time.
Full FTEs.
Okay. So
About 72 total employees.
okay, a company, once you get over 500, especially with the mix that we have with the different types of jobs, everything from, just providing government the face when, somebody knocks and walks in the door versus a sheriff versus healthcare and all of the things that we go into. Any company 500 or more, even in the private sector, would use somebody like a consultant for income or for salary. So it makes a lot of sense from a compensation perspective and to give ourselves the expertise of being able to go to all of the other people that they're utilizing or that they're working with, like you mentioned Austin Peters working with Jefferson County. The fact that there is that public sector portion of it gives us the ability to tap into their experience, because you just can't have that type of experience in one county. So you have to go outside.
Yes. So our initial reaction, my initial reaction being a conservative person was, we don't want to spend the money.
Right.
But you spend a couple of weeks doing this and you go, yeah, we got to spend money.
Yeah.
Because it's good money, you're spending good money.
Yes.
So that kind of leads to the next piece, and bear with me, this is a video that I want to show you. It's maybe some of you have read the book Drive by Daniel Pink before. I assume most of you haven't. I know those watching probably haven't. So there's a video here that explains basically what the book's about. And what I'll tell you is, in one of the heated discussions between Matt, Todd, and I, trying to flesh out exactly what we were looking for, and battling, having this discussion between pay for performance and what we have today, the pay for pulse, if you will. I kind of had this aha moment after everybody left the building. And this book drove the aha moment and really drove a lot of the discussions we've had since that day. So
I'd go for pay for a performing pulse.
Our motivations are unbelievably interesting. I mean, I find I've been working on this for a few years, and I just find the topic still so amazingly engaging and interesting. So I want to tell you about that. The science is really surprising. The science is a little bit freaky, okay? We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think. There's a whole set of unbelievably interesting studies. I want to give you two that call into question this idea that if you reward something, you get more of the behavior you want. If you punish something, you get less of it. So let's go from London to the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the northeastern part of the United States. And let's talk about a study done at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Here's what they did. They took a whole group of students and they gave them a set of challenges. Things like memorizing strings of digits, solving word puzzles, other kinds of spatial puzzles, even physical tasks like throwing a ball through a hoop. Okay, they gave them these challenges and they said to incentivize their performance, they gave them 3 levels of rewards. Okay? So if you did pretty well, you got a small monetary reward. If you did medium well, you got a medium monetary reward. And if you did really well, if you were one of the top performers, you got a large cash prize. Okay? We've seen this movie before. This is essentially a typical motivation scheme within organizations, right? We reward the very top performers, we ignore the low performers, and the other folks kind of in the middle. Okay, you get a little bit. So what happens? They do the test, they have these incentives, here's what they found out. 1, as long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what happens. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Now this is strange, right? A larger reward led to poorer performance? How can that possibly be? Now what's interesting about this is that these folks here who did this are all economists, 2 at MIT, 1 at the University of Chicago, 1 at Carnegie Mellon, okay? The top tier of the economics profession. And they're reaching this conclusion that seems contrary to what a lot of us learned in economics, which is that the higher the reward, the better the performance. And they're saying that once you get above rudimentary cognitive skill, it's the other way around. Which seems like this kind of, the idea that these rewards don't work that way seems vaguely left-wing and socialist, doesn't it? It's kind of this kind of weird socialist conspiracy. For those of you who have those conspiracy theories, I want to point out the notoriously left-wing socialist group that financed the research, the Federal Reserve Bank. So this is the mainstream of the mainstream coming to a conclusion that's quite surprising. It seems to defy the laws of behavioral physics. So this is strange. It's strange finding. So what do? They say, this is freaky. Let's go test it somewhere else. Maybe that $50 or $60 prize isn't sufficiently motivating for an MIT student, right? So let's go to a place where $50 is actually more significant relatively, right? So let's take the experiment. We're going to go to Madurai, India, rural India, where $50, $60, whatever the number was, is actually a significant sum of money. So they replicated the experiment in India roughly as follows. Small rewards, the equivalent of 2 weeks' salary. Small performance, low performance, 2 weeks' salary. Medium performance, about a month's salary. High performance, about 2 months' salary. Okay, so those are real good incentives. Okay, so you're going to get a different result here. Well, what happened though was that the people offered the medium reward did no better than the people offered the small reward. But this time around, the people offered the top reward. They did worst of all. Higher incentives led to worse performance. What's interesting about this is that it actually isn't all that anomalous. This has been replicated over and over and over again by psychologists, by some extent by sociologists, and by economists, over and over and over again. For simple, straightforward tasks, those kinds of incentives, if you do this, then you get that, they're great. For tasks that are algorithmic, set of rules where you have to just follow along and get a right answer, if then rewards, carrots and sticks, outstanding. But when the task gets more complicated, when it requires some conceptual creative thinking, those kinds of motivators demonstrably don't work. In fact, money is a motivator at work, but in a slightly strange way. If you don't pay people enough, they won't be motivated. What's curious about, there's another paradox here, which is that the best use of money as a motivator is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Pay people enough so that they're not thinking about money and they're thinking about the work. Now, once you do that, it turns out there are 3 factors that the science shows lead to better performance. Not to mention personal satisfaction. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is our desire to be self-directed, to direct our own lives. Now, in many ways, traditional notions of management run afoul of that. Management is great if you want compliance, but if you want engagement, which is what we want in the workforce today as people are doing more complicated, sophisticated things, self-direction is better. Let me give you some examples of this, of almost radical forms of self-direction in the workplace that lead to good results. Let's start with this company right here, Atlassian, an Australian company. It's a software company, and they do something really cool. Once a quarter, on a Thursday afternoon, they say to their developers, for the next 24 hours, you can work on anything you want. You can work on it the way you want. You can work on it with whomever you want. All we ask is that you show the results to the company at the end of those 24 hours in this fun kind of meeting, not a star chamber session, but this fun meeting with beer and cake and fun and other things like that. It turns out that that one day of pure, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of ideas for new products that otherwise had never emerged. One day. Now, this is not an if-then incentive. This is not the sort of thing that I would have done 3 years ago before I knew this research. I would have said, you want people to be creative and innovative? Give them a freaking innovation bonus. If you can do something cool, I'll give you $2,500. They're not doing this at all. They're essentially saying, you probably want to do something interesting. Let me just get out of your way. One day of autonomy produces things that had never emerged. Now, let's talk about mastery. Mastery is our urge to get better at stuff. We like to get better at stuff. This is why people play musical instruments on the weekend. You have all these people who are acting in ways that seem irrational economically. They play musical instruments on weekends. Why? It's not going to get them a mate. It's not going to make them any money. Why are they doing it? Because it's fun. Because you get better at it, and that's satisfying. Go back in time a little bit. I imagine this if I went to my first economics professor, a woman named Mary Alice Schulman, and I went to her in 1983 and said, Professor Schoemann, can I talk to you after class for a moment? Yeah. I got this inkling. I got this idea for a business model. I just want to run it past you. Here's how it would work. You get a bunch of people around the world who are doing highly skilled work, but they're willing to do it for free and volunteer their time, 20, sometimes 30 hours a week. Okay, she's looking at you somewhat skeptically there. Oh, but I'm not done. And then what they create, they give it away rather than sell it. It's going to be huge. I mean, she truly would have thought I was insane. Okay, it seemed to fly in the face of so many things. But what do you have? You have Linux powering 1 out of 4 corporate servers in Fortune 500 companies, Apache powering more than the majority of web servers, Wikipedia. What's going on? Why are people doing this? Why are these people, many of whom are technically sophisticated, highly skilled people who have jobs? Okay, they have jobs. They're working at jobs for pay, doing sophisticated technological work. And yet, during their limited discretionary time, they do equally, if not more, technically sophisticated work, not for their employer, but for someone else for free. That's a strange economic behavior. Economists who look into it, why are they doing this? It's overwhelmingly clear. Challenge and mastery, along with making a contribution. That's it. What you see more and more is a rise of what you might call the purpose motive. Is that more and more organizations want to have some kind of transcendent purpose. Partly because it makes coming to work better, partly because that's the way to get better talent. And what we're seeing now is, in some ways, when the profit motive becomes unmoored from the purpose motive, bad things happen. Bad things ethically sometimes, but also bad things just like not good stuff, like crappy products, like lame services, like uninspiring places to work. that when the profit motive is paramount, or when it becomes completely unhitched from the purpose motive, people don't do great things. More and more organizations are realizing this and sort of disturbing the categories between what's profit and what's purpose. And I think that actually heralds something interesting. And I think that organizations that are flourishing, whether they're profit, for profit, or somewhere in between, are animated by this purpose model. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's the founder of Skype. He says, our goal is to be disruptive, but in the cause of making the world a better place. Pretty good purpose. Here's Steve Jobs. I want to put a ding in the universe. All right? That's the kind of thing that might get you up in the morning racing to go to work. So I think that, that we are purpose maximizers, not only profit maximizers. I think the science shows that we care about mastery very, very deeply. And the science shows that we want to be self-directed. And I think that the big takeaway here is that if we start treating people like people and not assuming that they're simply horses, slower, smaller, better smelling horses, if we get past this kind of ideology of carrots and sticks and look at the science, I think we can actually build organizations and work lives that make us better off. But I also think they have the promise to make our world just a little bit better.
So I don't know if you've seen that before, but it was pretty motivating and really got us thinking completely differently about how we were going to make this plan work. And so as the presentation said, or the video said, the entire concept from that point on, when I had that kind of aha moment, was the entire concept is based on treating employees as individuals rather than groups or tribes, which we've been doing for decades. And it's not necessarily fault, it's just how we've always done it. So after a litany of feedback, we have 4 different focus groups. We've put a survey out. I think we got nearly 400 respondents of all of our employees. And this is one of the first tweaks. Although we've always talked about having the evaluation system rebooted, it became very obvious very fast that it had to be the first step in the process of doing the entire compensation plan model. So here are some of the opportunity areas that we're going to be looking at, and one of the first initiatives we're going to work to undertake before we get too much farther along. So first, the existing tool is very prescriptive and it's very generic. It has very little to do with the specific type of job you're in. It has a lot to do with just general good management of individual employee types, whether exempt or non-exempt, and that's basically it. So that's the first thing that we want to address. Next is the relevant difference between ratings. So if you don't know how our system works, and I assume most of you do not, this is my evaluation from 5 years or 4 years ago when I first started. And basically what you see in this system is there are 5 ratings for every competency and 5 ratings for every goal. It's exceptional, highly effective, achieved expectations, inconsistent, and unsatisfactory. So every single criteria or competency is measured, and it's measured based on 5 different criteria or 6 different criteria for each competency. But here's the problem with the system. If I get a 3, or I get a 4, or I get a 5, it doesn't make any difference. If I score at the end of the day on this 3.1 and I'm a general employee in the system, I get the same step as the person who gets a 4.9. There's absolutely no incentive to do anything other than pay for pulse. So you can go through the entirety of the competencies and find in here that it really doesn't make any difference how much I exhibit the ability to learn and apply new skills. As long as I'm rated as a 3, I'm doing fine. The same thing exists with goals. So if there were goals that were spelled out in here, what you'd see is as long as I achieve the goal, never mind how well I achieve it, or if I beat the timeline, or if it makes extra dollars, or whatever the case might be, as long as I get a 3, my pulse continues and I get paid for that. So the system itself has some flaws to it, and the difference between that 3-star and 5-star, what we heard was important to employees and needs to be something meaningful, which was consistent with what we just heard in the video.
Hey, Josh, So that difference between the 3 and 5 stars, is that known to employees? Are they
Oh,
aware of it?
yeah.
Yeah.
We heard
Yeah.
overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
I mean, this was one of the kind of side swipes of the focus groups. So the focus groups, when they came in, they only knew we were talking about compensation. They knew nothing else. We went through the presentation you're seeing, and we didn't even get halfway through and we were hearing, your evaluation system sucks. It's gonna be hard to go to this until you fix that. And what we really started hearing here, and I quoted one of them, we probably got, well, these guys weren't there for a couple of them. I bet you 15 times we are told by our supervisors, you will never get a 5-star, that's perfection, that doesn't exist. So we've got multiple levels of issues with our evaluation system. So the 3 and 5-star issue is one. Another one is, while supervisors have had some training, it's been very, very limited. What we know we need is initial training for whatever the new system is, but also ongoing, how do you evaluate your employees and make it meaningful to being purpose-driven. So there's 4 key things that we want to try to work for as we work through the evaluation system. Reboot, minimizing subjectivity, knowing if you have a supervisor, you're always going to have subjectivity, but trying to keep it to a minimum. Maximizing consistency as best as possible, and ensuring equity, which really are one and the same. Trying to treat people equitably, not fairly or equally, but equitably, and achieving fidelity or accuracy throughout the process. So those are things that we want to implement, and we feel like we can do this relatively quickly, at least relative to the entire compensation model change. And then another thing we heard overwhelmingly was the need to investigate doing a 360 evaluation for supervisors. One of the concerns that came out more than one time with the focus groups was that while the evaluation system itself is terrible, some of the supervisors that are giving the evaluations need some attention themselves, and that creates other problems. So I'm not entirely sold on a 360 evaluation component yet, but it is something that we're going to take a look at and exactly how it's implemented and what it means. Based on some of your looks, I'm sure some of you have worked through 360 evals before. So again, the entire concept is treating employees as people and not as groups. So philosophically, what we're really trying to do is drive towards intrinsic motivation. And I admit, particularly in the public sector, and this continues to be a debate, the level to which this is true specifically to the public sector versus the private, but especially in the work that we do, human services, law enforcement, nursing home, people who work here are really intrinsically motivated, maybe above and beyond the norm. They're not here to take a big check home. There's nobody here who's going to the bank, making bank, doing these jobs. They're really mission vision driven. And so this probably helps explain a little bit to you about why I'm kind of in the middle of this let's redo branding kick, because I think it's an important component. What I want to make sure that we're saying to employees is we understand that intrinsic motivation is really why you're here. You're here to serve people, not to make a dollar, although you need to make a dollar to help your family. But then you need to buy into why we're doing what we're doing, which compared to the other 72 counties in the state, or 71 counties in the state, is quite different. And so you either buy what we're doing or you don't, and then everything kind of cascades from there. On the other side of the coin is what we need from this group, starting with, and then ultimately the county board, and that is you need to be able to control your own destiny, that of the organization, that of the county in general, which starts with our biggest policy document every year, and that is the budget. You have to be able to control your expenses. At the same time, you have said to me for the last 4 years, we want to invest in human resources and human capital, and this is the opportunity to do that. So you have the kind of the liberty of being able to control and manage these expenses, but the responsibility to put your money where your mouth is. If we're going to get this organization down to size where we can manage the costs, then we've got to invest in the people who are here. Otherwise, the problem will continue to be an issue. So a couple of things that go with that. We want to, and what you'll see in a few minutes, is what I'm talking about with regard to levels. All of the all of the grades as we have them now, the different grades that employees are in. This is still in formulation, all of this is, but what we're talking about is a 3-year rolling market analysis rather than what the county has historically done, which is every 10 years we'll come back and do a new compensation plan or a review and go through the JDQ process, job description qualifier process, and make that the market analysis. Plus committing to maintaining, like we have for the last 4 years, maintaining the cost of living adjustments. We've done that since I've been here. There was a 3-year desert of doing that before I got here. And then spot check. Yes,
quick point
please.
as regards to compensation. Compensation is a package. And that package not only includes wage, it also includes benefits. It includes the fact, how many people did we lay off during the recession?
0.
0.
That I know.
Right. That's a big thing. The fact that you are in county government and we work to do what we can to make sure we maintain the quality people that we hire, we train, we work with. When we went through that, and there's a reason to that. One is, interestingly enough, when the economy is suffering, like in 2008, 2009, 2010, county services actually go up. Because more people are hurting, they come to the county, they need the help, and we're there to help them. But what that means, of course, is that you have a job stability that does not necessarily exist for the many people who were laid off from companies not only across Washington County, but around the state. So there is that part too. You are doing yeoman's work as regards to being helpful to people in a government setting. We want you to be fairly compensated, but part of that compensation package, one has to look at the entire package, and part of that is the fact that we very rarely, if ever, regardless of the what's going on in the economy, lay off for cause. We don't just say, hey, we're not doing this anymore, so everybody gets to go home, and if we start building this or get another contract, we'll hire you back. That doesn't happen in the county. So that type of stability, I think, has a value in the marketplace. Just wanted to make sure that was part of what we're talking about. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So again, we want to make sure that there's flexibility, so the county board has the liberty to be able to manage both the cost of living adjustments and the annual ranges, which I'll show you in just a few minutes. At the same time, it's starting to kind of, I think, go down the same path. Employees have to trust the system. So one of the trust deficits that we have, and the county board needs to know this, is that and I think we're better than we were let me rephrase that. I know we're better than we were when I got here, but there was a trust deficit because there was 3 years where there was no cost of living adjustment. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, for all the reasons that we did that, it took time to build that trust back up. So employees have to trust that we're going to be able to keep that and maintain it, and still understand it's the board's responsibility to be able to have flexibility as well. So it's all of the things that you've described at the same time. And I think that really drives towards that market analysis in COLA. It, again, based on compensation, total compensation, and not politics. And they need to know that and understand it. So if I just handed out a packet to all of you, and I'll show this in the slides at the very end as well for those watching. So each position will have, if you look at, there's a graphic, if you take the paper clip off and go to the next page, there's a graphic that has 3 blue rectangles, I guess. And these rectangles, so we have 4 different employee types, or job types, just as an example. But each one of these would be a different level, is what we're calling them. So currently, if you imagine our existing grade system, these job types are in one of 20 different grades? 20 different grades. Okay, so it's slotted, and all grades have 11 steps. So to keep going with the pulse joke, as long as you have a pulse, you keep moving through a step every year, assuming you get a 3-star rating and above, you just keep moving. What this does is it takes a slightly similar approach, but it breaks those steps up into 3 different ranges, and we're calling them levels. So those levels are front-loaded, We want to have a market rate at the end of the entry level. So one thing that we're finding is that it's extremely difficult to find good people. We're finding it all over, whether it's social workers or law enforcement officers. It doesn't really make any difference. It's hard to find good people. What we want to be able to do is get them through the market, up to market rate as reasonably quickly as we can. And then do that in probably 3 to 4 years. They can do it as quickly really as 2 or 3 years, but somewhere in that general range. But at a very, very minimum, 24 months to achieve that market rate.
Josh, what percentage of our positions are not at least at that market rate?
I couldn't answer that question specifically.
I just want to know how far behind we are. I mean,
I think it has more to do, well, it's almost impossible to answer the question, largely because the last pay plan was so bad that we don't know what the market is.
Okay.
But
That's where the experts come in.
Yeah.
it is where the experts come in. But just if the plan was right, many of our employees when I first started here would have been past the market rate because they've been here for a really long time. The longer I've been here, now almost 4 years, the more that's shifting and the more we expect it to shift as more baby boomers and silent generation retire. So as that silver tsunami, as they call it, continues to work its way through, the entire organization is going to flip. Now the other thing that we're finding pretty consistently is the newer generation doesn't stick around for long. They're here 3 to 5 years and either they're moving up or they're moving out. So the faster we can get them incented hit a market rate, the less likely they are, to leave. We've got some good benefits. We've got great health insurance. We've got a good retirement program. Our issue really is competing with other counties because there's some differences in the compensation plans that they provide, but generally speaking, it's very, very close. So what we found in many positions, corrections officers, highway laborers, CNAs, is that we've had to adjust rapidly. This committee has contemplated that, I think 3 times in the last 2 years. We're bumping $1, $2 an hour, $3 an hour in some cases. So it's changing and evolving. So what has to happen with an employee? Let's take the correction officer sheet here as an example, and we'll hit this again at the very end. Basically, an employee on our old system could only come in, when I first got here, could only be hired at step 1, which is the very beginning. Now since then, we've adjusted that. It could be more than that, but generally speaking, they're hired at step 1. And what would happen is every year they get their evaluation, assuming they're meeting good standing, they're eligible for any, and they're working towards completing county training and position requirements, some of which are spelled out in the spreadsheet that I shared with you. They're eligible to get anywhere from a 1% to a 4% increase. The only scenario where an employee will get a 0% is if they're not meeting expectations, which is the current system, but which I can tell you is also significantly less than 5%, probably 2%. If that, of our employee population. So, but they're also eligible for up to 4% on the front end. Okay, so if you're hiring someone essentially straight out of school, they're going to be in that first block. Now, the next couple of blocks, and I'll get to this in more detail, we may be able to bring people in based on experience at other levels, and I'll talk to that in more detail. But essentially, what we want to have happen is, it's not that same step and lane, pay for pulse. It really is based on, now those 3, 4, 5 stars matter, because yes, you're going to be eligible for a raise, but it might be 1%, it might be 2%, it might be all the way up to 4% if you're in that first level. So then the next step in the process, let's say the employee's been there for 4 years. It took them a full 4 years to get to the top of the range in that first level. then what they need to do a couple of things to be able to go into the next level, the correction officer 2, as we're calling it on this sheet, which is different from our current correction officer 2. So in order to get to the next level, they need to achieve advancement criteria and maintain a satisfactory performance review. So what are we saying? If you look at the sheet I've given you here, just a couple of examples of the types of things that could be considered. These definitely are sample, nothing's in stone. The completion of a 160-hour certification program, completion of 24-hour jail certification. These are the types of things we work with individual supervisors and say, managers, what will it take for an employee to get above market? If they've completed those things, if they've had consistent satisfactory evaluations, now they're eligible to move into the next range. And then the same thing happens. So now the pay increase potential is a little bit smaller, but the range is also a little bit smaller. So they're able to move through it quicker. And when they get to the edge of that second level, now they can go into the third. So it's a continual improvement process. Basically what we're trying to do is encourage employees to get better at their craft, to work hard, to exceed performance expectations, not just meet performance expectations, and work their way through the system. Another component that we think is important is migrating away from the red line, red circle, whatever you want to call it. People, when you have folks who are now in that level 3, corrections officer 3 position, they're topped out, in this case $27.21 an hour. We're not going to let them hang, and the only thing they have eligible for them is a cost of living adjustment. There's potential if they're still, if we've got a rock star employee who's at that level, we don't want them to leave. And right now what we've got is a situation where other counties are happy to pay them a little more and steal them now, because we fully invested by that time lots of manpower, lots of education power, staff time, training, etc. into them. So what we want to be able to do is if these employees are exceeding expectations, they're eligible for a one-time pay. Not that it goes to their base salary, so it's not going to cost the county into perpetuity, but it's a one-time, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. And they've got that incentive out there a little bit. We're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars, but in that 1 to 2%, maybe it is $1,000. And it could be spread out over ranges. So that's our concept. The last piece, I think, is a very important piece. And for those of you who have any military experience, that's kind of where this idea came from. So the last piece is a lot of the employees that we have hit that historically, that red line area. And they feel like there's nowhere to go. Once you hit step 11, you're stuck. And so what we want to do is we want to go to each individual job title, job position, and as we're sitting with the managers and identifying the criteria to move through the different levels, once we get to level 3, where can they go from there? What would it take for them to maybe go from being a corrections officer to a senior corrections officer, or from a social worker to some other position? Now, not every position is going to be able to move easily, but we're going to be able to tell people, here's what it takes if you want to move from position A over to position B. So if I'm a program assistant, what do I need to do to become a financial technician? And we can point to how do you get there. Now, it may take an associate's degree. It might take some certification program. Maybe it's a leap, but we're still telling you there's a way. You're not stuck. And I think that's one thing that people have had some fear and concern with. Am I missing anything?
No, I think
So a couple of other things that we think are important and really came out as part of the focus groups with employees. One is the ability to start new hires at any level. And this is really important when it comes to, no other county will watch this, when it comes to poaching employees from other counties. So if we want to bring in elections specialist who's got 15 years of elections experience. We have the ability to go through any of the levels, hire them at anywhere in the range, based on their education, experience, etc. One thing we've talked about internally is there would still be some expectation that those criteria we set for every other employee, they still have to meet, whether we give them a couple of years to do that or test out of it or something like that is still questioned. But giving management staff more flexibility to recruit, to poach from other places. Also, consideration of options for counteroffers for departing employees. This doesn't happen all that often, but occasionally we'll have a great employee who just gets a better offer from another place. Right now, we have no tools in the toolbox to say, hey, wait a second, it's only $1 an hour, we can match that. We have nothing. So working that into the system as well. Now, I know we've got to be careful with what that looks like exactly, but I think having some sort of tool with some criteria blessed by the committee that in the event it happens, and I'm sure you've all had experience with this, you're talking about, you've got hours, no more than days, and those types of things built in. So next, and I think this is equally important and ties to purpose, is we want to tie individual performance to the team's performance and the organization's performance, which always points to our mission, vision, values, and results. Not that they're specifically tied to one another, but I want employees to be able to see how their contributions are actually impacting the mission of the department and the organization as a whole. So for those in TV land, here's those different levels that I just talked about. Supervisors, you have 4 different types of employees in front of you. Social worker, correction officer, highway laborer, and program assistant. They're just different examples, and the corresponding spreadsheet that I gave you has a few of the different levels for those positions, what it would take to work your way through potentially, just as a draft.
Can I interrupt quickly?
Please.
Just so everybody knows, these are samples and not specifically or detailed examples.
You've had some time to chew on this. We'll have some additional outstanding issues and suggestions. But first and foremost was concerns about the transition. How do we transition from the system we're in today, which is very simplistic, to a system that's much more complex? An employee who's been here for 10 years but maybe hasn't checked off all the criteria. What's the expectation of them? Do they have to check off that same criteria? How far back do they have to go? What if they end up at level 3? All of those types of questions will have to be worked through. There was general agreement by the focus groups that some level of those JDQs going through job descriptions all over again is going to happen. Job titles, job descriptions have changed pretty dramatically in the last 4 years. As you know, we've consolidated positions, we've eliminated positions, we've shared duties, we've done all kinds of things. There's enough change in the last 6 or 7 years that even the individual staff members who hate going through this process said, yeah, we've got to look at it again. Also, there was a strong emotion about we need to do what we say we're going to do. So if the county's going to say you need to go through these trainings and different things in terms of internal trainings or certification programs, then we need to be willing to fund the training that goes with it. We can't just say you have to do it and, oh, good luck to you, go get it on your own. And we've never done that in the past, and I think just maintaining that expectation into the future. Also investing in internal training opportunities. We have started to do this in the last couple of years. I would say we've dabbled in it. I think getting more proficient at that. We have some capability, maybe bringing people in rather than having our own paid staff do that, but different opportunities like that and investing there. Another thing that we heard, and I thought was worth putting on here is, and this is not quite a quote, but it's pretty close, and several employees said, help us to get promotions internally when they arise. One of the things, and I think this is a failing of our system, and when I say this is a failing of human resources, and I don't mean the department, I mean how we're handling human resources. The employees who've had opportunities for promotions weren't prepared to go to a management level or whatever that position was going to be. And that's probably in part our own fault from a management perspective. And so they made it clear, we need, get us ready then. What am I missing? Help me get there. And I thought that was good of them to say that out loud. Finally, the budget, I heard this from managers specifically. How do I budget for a pay range of 0% to 4%? We've got ideas about how to do that, but it's something to be cognizant of as board members. You may hear that from some managers as we go through it. This is going to put a lot more stress on managers than they've had before in terms of the importance of that evaluation. I can tell you I've looked at a couple of evaluations. I know Todd looks at them at length. It's a bit embarrassing to see an evaluation. On the other hand, the supervisor doesn't have any more of an incentive to give a meaningful evaluation than an employee does, because they know just as well as the employee does, 3 is a 5 is a 4. So it doesn't matter, as long as I give you the blessing, you're gonna move on. So we need to change that culture. I already talked about the trust factor. Finally, I think this is important too, and it goes to Supervisor Mahalik commentary. This goes beyond simply pay. It's an entire compensation concept, which includes technology and mobility. Dave touched on this earlier. We're getting more and more interest in having employees be more and more mobile. And there are places to do that. Some have already done it. Obviously, squad cars are running around with cell phones and laptops all over the place. That's been a change over the years. We've got other departments that are lagging, I would say, way behind. So we have room to do improve there, and I think that will help with that autonomy component. So just a couple of things that we think this new model benefits. I think it drives towards a lot of success factors, continued growth and development of county employees, which I think is important and we need to improve on. Opportunity to advance more quickly. We've heard a lot in the last 4 years about how frustrating it is to have a long 11-step program. 11 years is a long time to work your way through. The ranges kind of put things in the hands of the employee. If they're knocking it out of the park, they have the ability to move. If they don't want to leave level 1, to get back to this slide, if they don't want to leave, if they're a social worker at $24.87 an hour and they want to stay there, that's market. God bless them. Stay there as long as you want. You're a productive employee. We're happy to keep you there. We'd love to have you move forward because it means you're going to get better training. You're going to be a more productive employee, we would suspect. But if you want to stay there, God bless you. It really puts the motivation and the impetus on them. So next steps, we've just completed an employee survey along with the 4 focus groups. We're kind of working through all of the data that we got with that survey, but very early on, it points to the same thing that the focus groups did. So I had a focus group of department heads. We had two groups of core value winners, and then we had a group of people that my direction to Don was, give me the folks who have been invested in the status quo, and I want to hear what they have to say. And I was overwhelmed with the positive nature of what we're doing. So it really was, not everybody is 100% happy, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say that, but 95% for sure. And I welcome you to talk to any of them. We obviously have to further develop the concept because it's just that, a concept, and including developing a new strategic priority for the next 2 years. We'll actually implement this. Present that to the county board with your blessing once we've gotten feedback from you. We need to pick a consulting firm. We'd like to utilize one of the 2 that we showed you today. I think we generally prefer Siegel Waters. They have a little bit more of the cutting edge rather than the status quo from what Carlson Detman had, and I think even Austin Peters Group has done. And then we need to actually implement that strategic priority. Our timeline as of today is to actually implement the new plan January 1st of 2020. With all the work we have to do with the evaluation tool and then actually going through all the job descriptions, I think that's a realistic timeline. If we hammer through it, if you really want to get this done faster, we can ratchet that up to July 1st. but we'd be cracking the whip. So, that's the presentation. Any, Todd, Matt, anything you want to add?
I think the only thing I would add on timeline is that one of the keys is that this would be a very big change relative to what we have. And so, and one of the things I've learned in my career is that employees need to understand the system to accept it. So there will be a window of educating the staff to understand how the system works, why it works, how do they get paid, and what impact do they have on their performance. So part of that 1/1 of 2020 is to make sure that training really happens and happens well.